This is a Hope 1032 podcast.
As followers of Jesus, in whom all things were made, we acknowledge the Darug people as the traditional custodians of the country on where this podcast is recorded. We recognise their continuing connection to the land and waters and thank them for protecting this land and its ecosystems since time immemorial. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we extend that respect to all First Nations peoples listening today.
It was horrible to hear the sentence, that was an awful moment. But at that moment, what was so awful about that was that my heart had leapt because I thought, okay, this is the moment. This is immigration. They're coming to get me. They're going to take me down to Yangon and deport me. But no, it was just a procedure, just a bureaucratic procedure. And instead I was taken away to another prison, even deeper in the heart of the country, in this place, this way out of the back block sort of place called Yamathan. And that was probably the worst moment of all, because as I'm being driven up there with the other guys as well, got guards and guns all around us, I can remember thinking, you know what, I think they're going to do this. They're going to make me serve the whole 4 years because I'm moving further away from any sort of connection to the outside world.
I'm Georgia and welcome to Finding Hope, the podcast that reminds you of the good in the world. Each episode tells the story of someone who has found real hope in challenging times and made the world a better place. Episode 65, Sean Turnell, Part 2. This episode is the second and final part of Sean Turnell's story. If you haven't listened to part 1, I encourage you to go back and listen to the previous episode before you start this one. Sean is an Australian economist, but has spent much of his career in Myanmar. Most recently, he was the economic advisor to Aung Sun Suu Kyi, the former leader of Myanmar. In 2021, following a military coup which overthrew Suu Kyi and the democratically elected government, Sean was arrested and illegally imprisoned by the junta. He wouldn't see freedom for another 650 days. Sean has recently released a book about his plight called An Unlikely Prisoner, and it's an honour to continue his story today. To recap last episode, Sean was captured illegally by the Myanmar military and held for months at 2 separate locations. 2 months in solitary confinement in what Sean called the box, before being moved to insane prison, where conditions were subhuman. As the months rolled on, protests across the country raged, the economy nearly collapsed, and Sean's freedom seemed within reach. However, everything was not what it seemed, and things would get worse before they got better. Much, much worse. After a few months in insane prison, you got moved to further into the political capital of Myanmar, I guess you could say. What were your feelings surrounding that move? Did that kind of feel like, oh, this could be coming to an end? Or was it like the opposite for you? It's like, oh, hang on, we're settling in for the long term.
Sort of a bit of both in a funny way, because, being taken up to the political capital, this place called Naypyidaw, which is the most bizarre city. It's one of those, created capital cities in the middle of the jungle in this case. So being taken there, I had mixed feelings. One, I was being taken deeper into the belly of the beast and, close to Min Aung Hlaing, the dictator and all of that. And also that meant that I was going to be put on trial. So it's insane for all its horrors. Was close to the airport, and it's the city that connects Myanmar to the world. So being taken to Naypyidaw just says to you that you're not going to be released anytime soon. And for me, again, it told me that there was going to be a lengthy trial process with Suu Kyi and the others. So that was really bad. On the other hand, I did think, okay, I'm not going to get out of here until the trial gets through. So to some extent, I tried to console myself with the idea that, look, this is the process, no matter how awful and long it is. As soon, if we get to progress along that process at some point, that's getting me closer to the end. So I just sort of had that in mind all the way through. I have to get through this, and it's actually good that it started. So I tried to sort of think about it that way, that every trial day was a trial day that didn't have to happen again, that we're actually just moving step by step towards some end. But again, I would have despaired much more if I knew how long it was going to take.
Yeah.
Because so every step of the way, I was sort of just about, probably after about 6 months, I began to change my mind. But for the first 6 months, I'm still thinking, oh, you know what? Next week I'm going to get out. Oh, it's going to be a couple of weeks away. So, so I had that in mind all the time as well. But Naypyidaw was really bad. And the trouble is, Naypyidaw as well, it's an awful place. It's just awful. It's so hot because it's right in the middle of the dry zone of the country. But I mentioned earlier, it's sort of like in a jungle sort of clearing as well, and there's mosquitoes and rats and spiders and snakes running around, and and the physical conditions were awful, even though it was a new facility. But in some ways, the infrastructure, the cells themselves were probably worse than in Insein. So, so pretty horrible place. Oof.
And Suu Kyi did join you in a way. She was in her own solitary situation, but you ended up having a joint trial with her. She had a bunch of other trials going on, obviously. Tell me about the trial, because in the end it went for a year. A year.
Yep.
That is ridiculous.
Yep.
And only one trial day a week.
That's right. Yeah. So one trial day a week, which meant that it just lasted forever, and there was always some delay. And so you would literally get up. So the trial day was every Thursday, and I would get up Thursday mornings and think, okay, we'll get out of the cells and we'll get to the court and all that, and then only discover that the judge was sick or the prosecutor was sick or something like that. So there was delay after delay after delay. And then COVID, actually, I'd forgotten about that. COVID meant for about 6 weeks there were no hearings and all that. So, it just dragged on awfully. And see, because it was very central to the whole military regime's thing for getting at her. Because essentially by putting me on trial with her, what they were trying to say is that I was the foreign spy and she was assisting me. So, I mean, the bizarre idea that I was sort of the puppet master behind her, pulling the strings. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. But it is effectively the message that they were trying to get across, that she and the democratic government were excessively influenced by foreigners, and that Myanmar was being taken over by sinister forces of international finance and all that sort of stuff. So that's the sort of charge they tried to build. Through specific documents, they would say, look, you've got this document. How have you got it? You've stolen it to give to the CIA or to give to MI6. But also they would say that, no, but you wrote all the documents and you forced them to do this. It was all mad, but very much part of the narrative that they were trying to construct.
Right. So they're almost like committing to the bit. Like once you started, you have to go through with it. And it wasn't even a real courthouse, from what I understand.
No, it was this silly house that was sort of like a guest house or something, that they had put a sort of fake coat of arms and hung it up on the wall and constructed a makeshift sort of dock. And it was ridiculous. Everything would fall over during the day, and the internet would go down and the lights would go off, because under their rule, Myanmar now has blackouts most of the day, or on and off through the day. And I mean, it was farcical. It would act, if it wasn't serious, it would be funny.
Yeah, well, that's what it sounds. It sounds like a skit.
Yeah, no, totally. It's sort of a tin pot dictatorship. That doesn't know. It doesn't know what it's doing is sort of the impression that you got.
Yeah. Well, tin pot or not, you finally got to sentencing, and they did give you a verdict. What happened?
Yeah. Well, so they found me guilty of breaching the Official Secrets Act and gave me a 3-year sentence for that. The weirdest thing about that was that the prosecutor in the end actually acknowledged that as a foreigner, the Official Secrets Act didn't even apply to me. And so I should not have even been given any break. And the judge acknowledged it in his final summing up. And then in the most bizarre way imaginable, given this is a completely illegal military regime, he actually said, look, despite the fact that Sean technically hasn't broken any law, there is the spirit of the law to think about.
What?
So,
the spirit?
The spirit of the law. So because my activities, these espionage activities of mine were breaching the spirit of the Official Secrets Act, I was given, 3 years imprisonment for that. And then in another bizarre technicality, because I'd been convicted of breaching the Official Secrets Act, that meant that I'd broken one of Myanmar's laws, which meant I also breached the terms of my visa. And so I then got another 4 years on top of that because of the visa breach. So it just complete madness.
Yeah.
Now, the two terms would have served concurrently, but it would have meant that I would have been in the prison for 4 years.
Okay. So you're looking at 4 years from the time of your sentencing.
That's right. That's right.
And did you fully believe that you would serve out your full sentence after that?
No. So I thought at that moment, because there'd been lots of rumours all the time where people would say to me, partly to make me feel good, but also in the context of Myanmar's history of how they treat foreigners, there'd been an expectation that I'd be convicted, sentenced, and then deported.
Okay.
So it was horrible to hear the sentence, that was an awful moment. But what kept me becoming hysterical or anything and maintaining hope was just the thought, okay, you know what, they're probably going to deport me. So, yeah, mixed sort of feelings. And then I had this weird moment that I talk about in the book where just after the sentencing, an immigration official came up to me and got all these details from me and asked me to hand me my passport. And I said, you've got to be kidding, you took the passport
2 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it was just madness. But at that moment, what was so awful about that was that my heart had leapt because I thought, okay, this is the moment. This is immigration. They're coming to get me. They're going to take me down to Yangon and deport me. But no, it was just a procedure, just a bureaucratic procedure. And instead I was taken away to another prison, even deeper in the heart of the country, in this place, this way out of the back block sort of place called Yamathan. And that was probably the worst moment of all, because as I'm being driven up there with the other guys as well, the guards and guns all around us, I can remember thinking, you know what, I think they're going to do this. They're going to make me serve the whole 4 years because I'm moving further away from any sort of connection to the outside world. But as it turned out, they only kept me there for a night and then took me down to Yangon. My heart again leaping now, thinking I'm about to be deported, but in fact they didn't, and they put me back into insane.
It's got to be mind games at that point.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. And I think even taking me up to Yamathan was partly about that. Also, in the nature of these dictatorships, sometimes I think lower levels officials, they're always trying to please the upper guy, and I think a lot of it was because the dictator particularly didn't like me and what I represented, as an international person and all that. So he would have seen me as this terribly interfering foreigner, blah, blah, blah. So I think in some ways some of these mind games were to try and break me, but then to report that to the senior leader, that, look, we've got him, we're doing this. So I think it's sort of partly that sort of thing, just the weird dynamics that happen in these regimes. Yeah, so, but whatever it was, mind games or bureaucratic stuff up or whatever, stayed on for a few more months.
I was going to say, so you got back to Insane, your original prison, and were there still the same kind of, some of your friends still there?
No, so a couple of horrible moments then come. First horrible moment was that I was put not where my old cell had been, but in a better cell. It was a much nicer cell actually, but it was death row. So I was in the area where the death row prisoners were. And what made that particularly bad is that even though Myanmar's got the death penalty on its books and has had for years, it never used to act on it. But under this regime, it is acting on it. So it was really awful because I remember walking into this ward or this area of cells, and how I worked out where I was that I noticed that the prisoners had hung their washing on the line, and instead of the usual prison outfit of blue, these were orange. And I knew that orange outfits were for the people on death row. And I thought, for one moment, oh my God, they're going to execute me. I started to think about, what if they're now going to go that step further and say that, I'm absolutely a spy or all the rest of it. So I was worried a little bit about that. But then just the whole atmosphere, of being in death row is just sort of awful. As it turned out, those prisoners, given the death sentence, that they were wonderful as well, by the way. So that story didn't change, and they were incredibly generous to me the whole time I was there. They would give me their bread ration and things like that. Yeah, so that was the first horrible moment. The second, much more horrible actually, was that I heard that one of my really good friends, this man called Kim Mong Shui, or Jacob as I knew him, who'd been probably the major person looking after me in Insane before, he'd been murdered, I found out. I just asked one of the other prisoners, I said, oh, well, where is Jacob? You know, well, I'd love to see him. And they said, oh, no, Sean, Jacob's gone. And at first, it was one of those really horrible moments, because at first I thought that was positive. I thought he meant he'd been released. And I said, oh, that's really good. And they said, no, Sean, you don't understand. He's dead. And they told me that a sort of fake fight had been arranged amongst some actually prisoners who weren't even prisoners, but pretend prisoners. A fight had been arranged, and he'd sort of been pulled into it, and then the guards basically attacked him and kicked and beat him to death. So yeah, just a really horrible. So a real series of low points. I think in that week after sentencing, I was sort of taken up to this Yemen, then back to Yangon, put on death row, found out about my friend, and so I pretty low point through that period.
Yeah, I was going to say, how did you describe yourself as an eternal optimist, but that's got to, even for an eternal optimist, that's got to be tough.
Yeah, no, it was, and particularly again because whenever they moved me, the books would dry up for a week or two, so I didn't have any books at that point as well, and then finally things would open up again. But yeah, no, that was pretty tough, and just had to dig deep. Probably, I remember just thinking to myself, look, you've been through all of this. It's heading on for 2 years now. You can get through it. Just keep on going. It's got to be getting towards the end. So just sort of kept trying to do that.
You described yourself as a Christian in kind of definition. Did you ever kind of turn to God, turn to prayer in like those moments of desperation?
It's interesting. You know what? In all the questions that I've had from podcasts and so on, nobody's actually asked me this question. It's very interesting. In a mixed way. So in the book, I talk about how they wouldn't let me go to church because there were church services that took place in Insane, but they didn't want me to go because they didn't want the massive prisoners to see me. So I could hear people singing hymns and so on from a service going on in the prison. But so then I just had my private connection, if you like, and feel of reaching out. And I did have a couple of moments, one in particular, where I really felt a very strong connection. Yeah, it's one of those things where, I can't really articulate it that well. It was just an overwhelming feeling one night lying in the cell in Naypyidaw at a particularly low point. And I was reading a book, and it was a book by a Japanese author whose name has just escaped me now. It was a fiction book, and he was talking about Christianity and things like that. And I remember thinking that, trying to think about that and wondering about why I hadn't felt anything up to that point, that I'd not had a sort of transcendental moment, or again, as you can see, I lack the language to talk properly about this, but I had this immense feeling of connection came to me at a point that I felt very strongly, and it had a Christian feeling. So not in traditional imagery or anything like that. In fact, the whole thing wasn't visual in any way. But I just felt a very strong connection to God, and that I felt that the figure of Jesus was involved in it. Like, again, it was just a very intense feeling. As you can tell, I can't articulate it any more than that, except just a very, very strong feeling. And it almost took me away from the moment, and then I sort of came back into the moment, if you like. But I felt that my mind had moved off into a different place and had come back. Very, very interesting. And it's one of those things, actually, I'm sort of trying to explore a little bit to try and work out what it was and what my feelings were, and try to revisit and try to find out what meaning there was from it. But it was a very distinct moment.
Yeah, and were you able to kind of hold on to that in the, weeks and months kind of following, just being like, okay, something's here. I don't know what necessarily, but I've not been abandoned.
Exactly. And a very strong feeling there was something much bigger going on beyond, and that that what was going on was part of something bigger. It was interesting, and I was able to draw on that.
Yeah, so there was never a sense of like, woe is me, why do bad things happen to me? It was like...
No. I think the other thing that helped me on that front too was because of my obsessions of history, I felt and knew that everything going on around me was part of that flow, if you know what I mean. So this was... there was a little bit of a feeling of fate, but not fatalistic, but fate in the truest sense of that I was part of a bigger story whose end I couldn't really conceive, but I thought, okay, but I'm doing the right thing. I remember being very fortified by that and thinking that the whole reason I was in Myanmar, the reason I was being imprisoned, was for something good. And in fact, even because this regime in Myanmar is so bad and so obviously bad, like it has no international, allies really at all. Yeah, so in other words, I really felt that I was on the right side of history as well. So all of that was, fortifying too.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. Sean, tell me about your release. There are a couple of false alarm moments in the weeks leading, but finally you did get news that you would be coming home, and it all happened rather quickly.
Yep. It's such an anticlimax in these ways always are. It was totally unexpected. So my wife every so often I could have phone calls. And she convinced them to enable a phone call that took place on the 17th of November, 2021, which was our anniversary. And so I'd spoken to her. So I'm in insane, 2 months after conviction, nothing on the horizon now. So this is a real low point. I'd heard all the stories. I'm in that death row area. I'd heard what happened to Jacob and all the rest of it. Nothing on the horizon suggesting any release. It was a loving conversation, but a little bit sober as well, because we'd sort of reconciled between us that I wouldn't see Christmas, that I would still be in the prison. So pretty much of a low point. I have this call on the 17th of November. Next morning, a prison guard just suddenly appears and says, "Good news, Sean, you're going home." But he said it just like that, without no animation in his voice or anything like that. And I said, "Oh, whoa, wait a minute.
Back up a little bit there, buddy."
I said, "Look, please don't muck around. Like, is this true? Is this real?" And he said, yeah, no, it's real. You've got 10 minutes to pack up." And a whole bunch of other guards all came at that point as well to get me to pack up and to insist that I had to go. And I remember I was just a bit confused. I didn't know what to do. You know how sometimes in those moments you get up and you sort of walk to start doing something and then walk to do something else and you complete neither task. And in the end, I just walked away with almost nothing. Yeah, then had to sit through some speeches because there's a whole bunch of people being released on that day. But yeah, incredible moments. And then, within 24 hours, I'm on a plane to Bangkok to Melbourne, even though I live in Sydney. So, but the only plane DFAT could get was from Bangkok to Melbourne. Got to Melbourne. Then the Prime Minister left his jet in Melbourne to take us up to Sydney. But the reason why I mention all of that, the sequence, is just to say that within a 24-hour period, I went from being in a dingy concrete cell with no hope to being on the Prime Minister's private jet and getting a meal put in front of me. Like literally actually it was even less than 24 hours, within about 20 hours. These sequence of events have taken place. And I remember thinking, oh my goodness, what on earth is going on?
So what changed? Why were you released that particular day?
Well, so I think in retrospect, the regime were wanting just to get rid of me because I was too much of trouble for them. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is, of course, my imprisonment was causing outrage around the world. So the Australian government was putting the pressure on, but so importantly were the US government, the British government, the Vietnamese government, the Singaporeans, everyone just piling on. And also the regime, I think in the end, even though they weren't worried at all at mistreating me, they didn't want me to die on them. So, and what would come from that. So I was troubled, in other words, and they kept me there nearly 2 years. The message had been sent. So in other words, I think they were looking for an excuse just to get him, get rid of him, get out. And it was actually an obscure holiday on that 17th of November, a very obscure holiday, national holiday that I hadn't even remembered. So, and they often use those sorts of days to do these prisoner amnesties. So, yeah, so they chose that. But I think it was, just to get rid of him, get him out of the country, too much hassle.
Who would have thought? An economics professor causing hassle.
Indeed. Absolutely.
So tell me about your reunion with her. Obviously, you touched down in Melbourne and all of a sudden you were reunited.
So she got the news before I did. In fact, many hours before I did.
Did she know when she called you on your anniversary?
No idea at all. So she was, quite in despair, or almost despair. Wouldn't say quite despair, but then about only 2 or 3 hours after that, she gets a call from people in Myanmar saying, look, we've got good information. We think Sean's going to be released. So she then never slept, basically, for the next, 24 hours or so, just hearing rumours come in, and it's all beginning to form up on Facebook, all these rumours coming around of a mass prisoner release and so on, and that I was going to be one of them. Final confirmation came, I think, about 12 hours later, after she thought, and Department of Foreign Affairs, confirmed it, and they said, look, do you want to come down to Melbourne? Sean's being flown down to Melbourne. Do you want to come down with us and be there to greet him at the airport? In which she was. And one of the things I talk about in the book, which is true, was I remember thinking, oh, gosh, I haven't seen her for 2 years. Is this going to be awkward or anything? But, of course, it wasn't at all. It was just, I had this feeling, oh, gosh, what do I say? But it was just, really cool and all that. And then, within an hour, we're on the Prime Minister's jet coming back up to Sydney. Yeah.
So quickly, how was your adjustment period? Because there were things that you mentioned in the book that you'd forgotten how to use a smartphone, which, because you have no access to that.
All of that, I mean, and, so I'm 59 now, and I was, 58, 57 then. So I mentioned that just to say I wasn't totally on top of the technology anyway, but, I've had an iPhone and all the rest of it. But I remember thinking about a year into the imprisonment, I thought, how do apps work? What do they look like? And I was thinking there's buttons on your phone, and I remember just thinking, how do you use them? What do you do? So I had to get back into that, able to use that, emails, things like that, and all of that stuff. I had to have some medical inspections, I think is the word, just to make sure I hadn't picked up anything in the prison, because I'd gotten COVID 5 times.
5?
So 5 times with COVID.
And you were actually the first person in Insane to be vaccinated.
Exactly. But unfortunately, the vaccines I got were the Chinese Sinopharm and Sinovac, and I'm the living proof that they don't work. Had to get medical checkup and all that. The worst were my teeth. It's one of the things about getting older, your teeth. they're the trouble spots. And I'd begun to get, toothache, and I'd broken a couple of teeth on the terrible food that we were served in the prison, which often had little rocks in it. And I'd broken my 2 front teeth from that anyway. So, had to get dental work done. And mind you, the dental work continues all the way to the present, let me just say. But other than that, the adjustment back was great. I met my dad and my sister, my nephews, and it was all good from that moment. In fact, I never really had any real problem in adjusting back. And sometimes people would say, why, why was it easy? And my standard answer, which I think is the truthful answer, which is just that life in Australia, in Sydney, and we live in the middle of the city, and so we can access, the waterfront if we walk a few hundred metres away and things like that. Life is just absolutely wonderful in Sydney. So it wasn't too hard to adjust to.
Yeah, for sure. And there was one quote in your book which I kind of had a little bit of chuckle about, saying repression is not always a bad thing. And do you think in a way, like, that's how you continue to move forward as well? Do you think maybe subconsciously there's things that you're just never going to bring to the surface because it's just going to be too painful, or at least not yet?
That's right. Yeah, again, that's really insightful pickup. I think, so in my survival strategies, they had nothing to do with modern notions of psychology or anything like that. it was very old-fashioned, again, because of my reading of history and all that. So I drew upon, the people that I read about as a kid, the sort of heroes of, the Battle of Britain and all this sort of stuff. And I say this, with somewhat embarrassment because it's going to make me sound like an old fogey and so on. But there are times, I think, where, just keeping stuff down, moving on, adopting the stiff upper lip, sometimes actually that is the better approach.
Yeah, well, when you've been through so much, maybe if you start unpacking it, you'll never stop unpacking it, and then it's just you just want to enjoy life.
Yeah.
I get it.
No, I think that's right.
Sean, you've had a brilliant, happy ending to this incredibly hard story, but there was a final twist a few weeks after you came home, a nail in the metaphorical coffin, if you will. What happened?
Well, so the senior general, Min Aung Hlaing, who the dictator of Myanmar, got very upset. And he got very upset because I told my story when I got back to Australia. And, I did some television interviews and some newspaper. I can't imagine why he didn't think I would do that.
You just go home and never tell anyone.
Yeah, just never, just slink back or whatever. But so he became very upset about this. And so he got the Attorney General, which, the rule of law means nothing in Myanmar anyway, let me just say. But anyway, basically what happened was that the amnesty that I'd been given to allow my release was cancelled. And so all the charges and the prison term and all that reinstated. And at first I was content to sort of laugh that off, about...
what are they going to do? I'm here.
Yeah, what are they going to do? Who cares? And until actually then the Department of Foreign Affairs said to me, no, Sean, actually this is going to cause you a hassle because it's going to impact upon your travelling. You're going to have to be really careful now because if you go to countries that might be aligned with Myanmar or anything like that, you might find that they might act upon an arrest warrant or things like that. So it has been a bit of a downside, actually, a bit of a hassle in that now, spontaneous travel is sort of beyond a possibility now. I have to sort of arrange everything beforehand and all that. And in some ways, the worst of it is not even that. It's just the idea that he thinks he can reach out to affect me here in Sydney. It's so outrageous.
And it affects that sense of freedom.
It does, yeah. And even though, again, apart from the travelling thing, it shouldn't matter, but it nonetheless does. You have that feeling that this regime still has its claws out, So, yeah, so every so often that becomes sort of a little bit of a thing. I don't exaggerate how much it affects me, but it is a little bit. I don't feel fully free, I think, because of that.
Sean, I don't want to end this interview without giving you the opportunity to share what the situation is still like in Myanmar. You are free, but the people of Myanmar are not free. This regime is still in power. What is the situation like there now?
So it's really awful and hopeful at the same time. So the regime is absolutely ruthless and brutal. So thousands of people have been killed, millions internally displaced, millions fleeing the borders, all the hopes and dreams of the young people I used to work with who were so impressive, all just shattered. The economy is just in terrible state. So it's awful, like really awful. But the hope comes from that the people are not standing for it. And there's been mass civilian resistance to this. A government has been formed of people who were legitimately elected at the head of this movement. But basically, the democracy movement has reformed and are fighting back. Again, principally young people, incredibly courageous and so on. And literally within recent weeks, they've been able to have some really extraordinary successes on the battlefield, but in other ways as well. So this regime, which is illegitimate in so many ways, is now being really pushed back. So I'm a little bit hopeful. The trouble is there will still be terrible things coming because this regime, but they know the end for them is coming, and they'll be very desperate and ruthless in their fight back. But yeah, I just think that the forces are beginning to tilt now towards the resistance against this regime. So I'm a little bit hopeful, and I think quite a lot of people are. In fact, I think probably the biggest emotional thing at the moment is to try and dampen one's hopes down because, we've been hopeful before, but yeah, it's hard not to be hopeful now that this regime might be on its last legs.
Sean Turnell, it has been an honour chatting to you. An Unlikely Prisoner is out now wherever you get your books. Thank you so much for being on Finding Hope.
Thank you. That was really special.
Thank you so much to Sean Turnell for sharing his story today. An Unlikely Prisoner, Sean's memoir, is available now wherever you get your books, and that information is also in the show notes. I'm Georgia, and thank you for listening to this episode of Finding Hope. To help this podcast reach more people, you can subscribe and leave a review on your favourite podcast app. And share it with a friend who may need a little bit of extra hope right now. Next episode, join me as I sit down with Jessica Clancy, a childhood abuse survivor who paved her way through brokenness into a life of renewal and hope.
My stepdad at that time was a registered minister. So it went from like physical drug abuse to control and manipulation through religion. We had gotten into a circle prayer, and he had said, I give you permission to get involved with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So it was like a curse was passed over my life at that time. And looking back, I have had more life without a mom than I did with a mom. So, I mean, obviously the body keeps the score and those feelings are still there, but you just learn how to keep pressing forward and use the past to grow from and learn from and do better.
For now, I'll leave you with this verse. Whoever sows injustice will reap calamity, and the rod of his fury will fail. Proverbs 22, verse 8. Catch you next time.
This is a Hope 1032 production. Thanks for listening.